For oaks, we have the coast live oak and the valley oak, but we're not seeing a lot of leaves on the valley oak yet. So here's where you could show them the contrast of the two. The table is a really good place to stop. And then show them the coast live oak. Okay, so as a naturalist, they allow me to pull one leaf off of an oak tree per school walk. You could tell them whatever you want to tell them about. But I like to show them the leaf because I want them to see the coast live oak is interesting because if you look at that midrib, I'll pass this around. The midrib is what goes up and down like that, and then it branches off the other veins there. You'll see little tufts of hair, what look like hair. They're little kind of fuzzy things. So when you talk to the oak biologists, they'll say this is the only leaf that has hairy armpits because it looks like a stick figure with hairy armpits. So pass that around, look at the hairy armpit. Going back a couple 300 years, they at that time lived off of this tree. This was an important food source for them. It's a very important food source for animals and such. So what do the oaks give us? And then you can get into the acorn. So have an acorn with you, and you can show them. If they don't know what it is, you can just show them this. It's not an exact match here, but you can super glue one of these on. These are all just mismatched. But you can show them the acorn. You can explain how the animals can eat the acorn without doing anything, but humans and the Shumash had to process it by running it through water. They grind it up and run water through it to get the tannins out because we have tannic acid that can give us a stomachache. It injects something onto the branch of the oak, some chemical in its body onto the branch of the oak. And you can get more specific if you want, but I keep it real vague. And the oak reacts by making this ball, and some people call it oak apples, oak galls. There's actually a whole book on galls if you guys are interested, plant galls. And you can see the little holes. So this gives the babies, the oak tree makes this, and then the wasp lays the eggs, and this gives the babies shelter and food. They eat their way out of this. You'll learn a lot from the kids. One of the kids on my walks years ago, a little girl said, "Do you know that the Torah was written in oak gall ink?" And I was like, "I didn't know that. That's fascinating too." So I had to do a outdoor class for a Chabad group, and then I asked the rabbi, I said, some little girl told me, and he looks at me and goes, "Yeah, she's right." So you can learn from the kids, scat and all that, same stuff we talked about back there. So take your time here, ask kids, we may not see the animals, but what might we see, and then go through the whole thing, food eaten, fur, somebody will say footprints, then you'll say, yep, tracks, animal tracks, exactly. And that's when you can talk about the different. And it's funny because I teach it to the kids, and then at Topanga at the visitor center, they have a cast of a mountain lion. And I hold it up, and the kids right away pick it out. Like, oh, that's a cat track. They could tell it's rounder and by all the things I taught them. So here's where a good spot, because there used to be a really good wood rat nest back there, and I could talk about the wood rat that's gone from the fire. There was a good wood rat nest up in the tree. Sometimes they do that. So briefly, we could talk about the wood rat, and I'll explain that it's the female that lives in there. The male makes the nest. The female's in there. Once they have the babies, the male leaves or he's kicked out. I'm not sure which. I've had both happen to me, and I don't know which is better, but you could talk about that. You could talk about how it's passed down generation to generation and that type of thing. And I can send Debbie that wood rat information, and she can send it to you guys typically. So this is where I would talk about tracks, wood rats, things like that. Point it out, and then we'll stop and talk about the deer here. Who's got the laminate? I did. All right, so you can throw your stuff on the bench. You guys are all going to need both hands in a second, so you'll throw your stuff on the bench that you don't need. So we'll go ahead over to the deer. So we'll talk about deer. And then once I get through that, we'll talk, since we're in the shade, we'll talk about Native American culture a little bit.
Do you talk about the creek at all?
I do a little bit once we go the other side. Yeah, once we see Las Virgenes Creek.
Yeah.
There's a picture in here. Mule deer, okay.
Predator or prey?
All right. What else does it say there?
Look at the eyes, facing forward or more to the side.
So deer, are their eyes facing forward or more out to the side? So you get the kids, to think about that. What else?
Could they be watching out for attackers?
So talk about how, predators typically have forward-facing eyes, where prey typically is a little more off to the side. How about the ears? What do the ears look like on that mule deer?
Are they large to help listen for attackers?
So look at the picture. Look at the size of those ears. All right. My wife's the only one that's got. No, never mind. What about her either.
That's why you got kicked out the first time.
Yeah, exactly. So we have large ears, and this is a great spot to show them how effective those large ears are. So everybody, make sure your hands are free. Listen to the creak real quick, and now take your hands and do this. Take them away. Face the creak.
Oh yeah, it's a big difference.
Amplification, right? So that is the mule deer. That's why it has such big ears. It's going to listen for animals that want to eat it. So then we know based on those facts that this is in fact a predator or prey. What is it? Kids, what kind of animal is it? Prey or predator? Prey animal. Good job, guys. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But the kids don't. And we'll see more.
And there's another hole.
Another hole in the ground. Yay. Do I have an example of that? There it is. Wow. And we don't have the little disco balls forming on this one yet. So we have the wild cucumber, and this is not the cucumber you kids eat. This is called wild cucumber. It's just a name. But the interesting thing is the Native Americans that were here would take the seeds from the seed pod, that's a little disco ball, spiky looking thing. They'd grind it up, they'd go to a stream, and they'd throw the powder in a stream, and the fish would just float to the surface.
Huh.
Easy fishing, right? So that's something to show. And then also what's really cool, you guys are going to like this because there's no way to explain this to a kid these days. If you look at the tendrils, that little tendril goes out, right? And it curves and does this little thing, latches on, and then it anchors in the plant the leaf by pulling it. And when it pulls it, the two tendrils go different directions and it makes that little kink in the middle. Can you guys all see the kink? And it looks like an old telephone cord, and the kids are going to look at you like you have three heads because they don't know what a telephone cord is. But it looks like an old telephone cord that would get the kink in the middle sometimes. But more importantly, talk about the Native Americans use the seeds.
Decomposition, the FBI. I'm not in trouble, am I? Fungus, bacteria, and invertebrate insects break down the wood, ultimately putting nutrients back into the soil. This makes life possible.
Great.
What kind of bacteria?
So we'll talk about that. So here, kids, here is a good example. Why does the Park Service leave that there? Why don't they clean it up? Don't tell me because they're lazy, because we have a park representative here. Right? Because some kids will say animal homes. They use it for homes, and they're absolutely right. They do. Animals do sometimes. Some animals will use that for a shelter of some kind. But because of the FBI, fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates, or insects, some people call it, and they break down that log through decomposition, and they put nutrients back into the soil, which is what makes life possible. If we don't have decomposition, we don't have life, because we can't put nutrients back into the soil. So we need decomposition, and that's why that's there. So we have fungus, which, think about mushrooms, and we'll see a tree with some mushrooms later. Insects, we all know what insects are, and then we have bacteria. And I know what you guys are all thinking, you kids are all thinking, what kind of bacteria is it? So we take the leader. So you come here, everybody else stay there. Guys, wait right there. I'm going to come out with my person that's got the cards, and she's going to whisper. Remember, we're dealing with fifth graders here. Come on over here, just whisper in my ear. And they don't know what it is. That's fine. They'll usually say, I don't know. And you'll come back, and you've got the kid next to you, and you'll say, she said it's heterotrophic bacteria, and she's absolutely right. And the other kids get all wide-eyed, like, you knew that? That's really cool. And you could explain that, heterotrophic bacteria is other feeder, where autotrophic is self-feeder, so the other feeder, they're eating on that. You don't need to get into that with the kids. It's just fun to put one into the spotlight and all the other kids think that she's a genius. If you get to it before the birds get to it, because they love it. Taste one. It tastes, I'm not a coffee drinker, but a buddy of mine is. And he just goes and picks these off, not in the state park. He picks these off and just eats them like crazy, and he said it tastes just like coffee. But it will also give you that same laxative effect that coffee does, so don't eat too much. So coffee berry, a bunch of it over here. You'll see a lot of it on there. Anybody that goes camping or backpacking, or even just out for a day in the woods where you're gonna sit under a tree and have a little picnic lunch, you should know about this. Before we go under any tree, we wanna look around at that tree. And these are valley oaks. Leaves aren't coming back yet. But if you look around on the ground, you're going to see branches that have broken off. And what they call that in backpacking world is widow makers. They will kill you. These are really, really heavy things. If few years back, 2 boys up in Yosemite were killed in their tent. A branch fell on them. So before you sit down, especially on a breezy day, look up. Are there any branches hanging? Does something look like it's going to break? Like to me, there's one up there that looks like it could break at some point. The bark's all coming off of it and such. Especially if they're hanging. You'll see that across at King Gillette with the sycamores. They're just sitting there, just hanging. They fell off. They got caught. They'll just blow off. You look around the ground, there's tons of them. So for safety reasons, please, before you guys set up a tent, before you pick a campsite, before you sit down and have a picnic lunch, look up and make sure there's no widowmakers that are going to come down on you. Poison oak.
But it isn't,
How do you know it's not?
because you're holding it.
Maybe I'm immune to it. You want to pass it around? You get that hesitation. So this is also in the sumac family, just like poison oak. But look at the poison oak and look at this. This is called basket bush. Very closely related, won't give you the rash. Why is it called basket bush? Because Native Americans used to make baskets out of the branches. They changed the name. It used to be, there was an old botanist in Simi Valley that I love walking with, and I started talking about basket bush. He's like, I know all the plants. I've never heard of that. I started explaining it to him, and he goes, oh, you mean squaw bush? I'm like, no, they changed that name. It's not squaw bush, but it used to be. So the way you can tell the difference is, look at that center leaflet. Poison oak, you're going to have a stem there. This one is straight down, touching the other 2 leaflets without that stem. So look at that, your picture of poison oak there, and we'll see more as we go by it. There's no middle stem. And then to make room for these 2 leaflets on the sides, this one in the middle is kind of tapered. It looks kind of like it's tapered toward the bottom. Can you guys see that? Mm-hmm. Where poison oak, it'll be a fuller leaf. So if you ever come across and you're not sure, look for that, called a rakish or whatever, that center stem. I can't remember the botany term for it. And if you don't see it, and you see like the little cutout that makes room for the 2 side ones, but you'd be surprised how many people think that's poison oak. Look at it on the stem. It looks like poison oak.
Would be mugwort, which has both a medicinal and utilitarian purpose. You can make a tea from it if you have stomach issues. The aroma, if you want to touch it, has a very calming property. So it can be used for, well, it says ADHD.
Right. So this is a plant that Enrique, that you guys were on that walk, he was a LAUSD teacher for 30 years, and when he learned about this plant, he took the leaves, put them in a little sock, and before each class, because he had full inclusion classrooms, he would have the kids toss to one another. The aroma would calm down the kids with ADHD. So according to Dr. Adams in the book Healing Medicinal Plants of the West, this plant is very good for ADHD. It is very good for women's monthly cycles. When I say stomach issues, I'm dealing with 5-year-olds. I'm talking to you as adults now. I wouldn't mention that on a walk with kids, but you say it's good for stomach issues. And this is also good for poison oak. You can take the leaves, kind of crunch them up, get some juices out of them, and put that on poison oak as well. So then not just that, once the leaves have dried and they come off the stem with just you pulling up, so toward the fall, I'll just reach down and just pull up and get a handful of dried leaves, not in state parks. And I'll take that and I collect that, and that's good for friction fire. That's an ember extender. What did the natives do with that? They didn't want to rub sticks together everywhere they went. You light it and it's like a cigar. It just smolders. When they got to the next spot, they would take that smoldering ember and they would just blow it into flame. So it's a really good ember extender, fire carrier type of thing. But most importantly, you want to use this for poison oak. You want to use this for stomach issues and for kids with ADHD. It works really well. And typically with a group of 5th graders, they don't really care about that, but then the teacher's like, give me some, I'm going to use it in my class. Not blooming yet, or at least it wasn't last weekend, so probably not yet, is going to be the datura and the poison hemlock. So I can show that to you guys next time we go. On the main trail, that's where you're going to run into better selection of willow. Talk about the willow and the Native American homes. I don't talk about a lot on that trail if I've done this, but I will stop at the willow and then the yucca. There's a little bit of yucca if you know where to look for it. I definitely want to point it out to you guys at some point so you know where the yucca is, but let me show you basically what I do with the kids and the yucca.
So let me ask you, you go on that trail, then you backtrack?
Yeah, I do.